Live? Now we're live. Welcome. So, we're here to find out what the soul is. Remember? As like every other day. Because everyone wants to know, right? You want to know, right? It says in the Fetish, I didn't read that piece yet. It says in Chalek Aleph Perek Lamed Dalet, one of my favorite Shtiklech Meir Nevaichem. It says like this: every person, even the stupidest person, not typish ba'anashim, stupidest guy, you wake him up in the middle of the night, or like you wake up a sleeping person. I'm not sure if he means a mushla or an imshla. You tell him, you don't want to know, you don't like have a really passion to know how many heavens there are, how they look, what's in them, what are the maluchim, how was the world created, what's the point of the world being created, what's the point of all the parts of the world being created, what is the soul, how does the soul get into the body, does it leave the body, I mean, can it be separate from the body, if it's separated, how does it separate, where does it go to, for what, to what, and all these things. And if you tell anyone like that, stupidest person, you say, of course, yeah, tell me. So it's true that everyone wants to know. And then he says, well, then you tell him, yeah, but you have to, for a week, you have to come to my class and not work in that week. And then he says, forget it. I'll just believe whatever I want to believe, like to believe. And that's different shmis. But the point is that according to Rambam and Aristotle, very famously in the beginning of metaphysics, all people want to know. So you should want to know. And one of the first things you should want to know is what a soul is, because that's basically what you are. So you should want to know it, right? So you should wonder about it.
I'm not sure if I agree with the statement.
But it's a fact. It's an empirical fact. He didn't say it because he is philosophical.
You know that people want to know things?
Yeah.
Most people want to know things? Is that true?
Of course, yeah, it's still true. Aristotle says, you know how we know that people want to know things? Because they watch the news. It says in metaphysics. And he says the theater and so on. But yeah, everyone, what do you mean? There's the best industries nowadays are about telling people things that they should know, right? Called media.
But most people
don't
care about the abstract. Like if there's certain like burning questions, most people don't care to analyze it.
No, I think that most people think that they already know, so they're not so much looking for knowing. That's what it says here also. That's what Socrates discovered by walking around in the Agora in Athens. Most people think they already know. And most people actually think it's very important. It's very hard, for example, to change a person's mind about what he thinks about his soul. Which shows you that most people think that it's important to know. They just have a mistake, they think they know. Like Reb Salante once said, the Chassidim and the Misnagdim have the same different mistakes. The Misnagdim have a mistake, they think you don't need a Rebbe. The Chassidim have a mistake, they think they have a Rebbe. So it's the same kind of thing. It's true that you need to know. And most people that have a mistake, they think they know. So that's, yeah. So you should want to know. No? Although if you don't want to know, then should it's out, man. But it's true. I think that like this, like people want to know, and the fact that everyone is looking for knowledge is the reality of what most people do with their free time. They're just confused with what knowledge is, but that's a different side. But that's what most people do. They're watching movies or television or internet or whatever it is. But it's knowledge. That's the act. What are you doing? Finding out stuff, right? True stuff, false stuff, fictions, not true. Ich weiß nicht. Finding stuff out. That's what they're doing. Plato calls them the lovers of sights and sounds. Remember? Okay. So everyone wants to know what the soul is. So that's one thing. Now, thankfully, since we're religious people supposedly, then we have another reason to want to know, which is really the same thing, just like a different levish, because it's so important. Someone was telling me, it says in the Siddur that you have an neshama and it goes in the morning and it comes away at night and so on. So you want to know what it means. That's another way to convince people that they want to know things. It's just a different version of the same thing though. Or if, like we keep on saying, if you're like worried about, is it true? Some people are very interested, is it true? Is it true that what my Rebbe told me, that you're neshama and so on? That's important. Or some people are worried, if someone else tells me that it's not true, do I have like a good arrow to shoot at him back? Otherwise known as apologetics. Just another way of fighting. It's also important. So anyway, these are all reasons why people want to know. So, one of the ways to know things, starting from the beginning, every time it starts from the beginning. One of the ways to know things is to think what other people thought. Other than their friend Descartes said, but not like him. Well, also like him, but it's at least to let me explain why. And this is Aristotle speaking, because starting to know things is a very complicated thing, because you need to know what the question is, like what are you asking, and even to just basically knowing the correct question is like most of the answer. So whenever you want to know things, you say, "Oh, what do you want to know? What's the answer?" There's only one possible answer. I want to know everything, or if you want to make it a little more precise, everything knowable, which is, again, the universe. Maybe there's parts of the universe that are not knowable, or there's some reality that's not knowable. That's another shmiz that gets us into the whole question of the limits of reason and so on. But that's not interesting. We're not talking, that's not accessible to humans, so it's not relevant. Maybe it's accessible by simple faith or by something. So everything. That's the only correct answer. Everything, right? You want to know everything, right? You want everything? No? Everything. Well, what's the shot? You want everything, right? The problem is that everything is a big mumble jumble. At least if you open up your eyes in the morning, you see that the world is sort of messy. And knowing doesn't mean, this is very important, knowing doesn't mean having a list of everything, right? The longest phone book in the world that has a database for everything. Even the database is already structured knowledge, right? Even a phone book is structured. So knowing has to mean structured knowledge. That's basically what knowing means.
Heschel had a story where someone went over. You know the story where
No.
he goes over to, like, in Grand Central Station, he goes over to the information desk and he asks for information about, like, orbital patterns.
No.
You know.
Yeah, their information desk. They should know, right?
That's what it says on the. You know.
Turns out they only know where the train goes.
Yeah.
Huh? They don't even know where the train goes. So you need to know everything, and knowing everything is not really possible before you have, unless it's structured. That's basically what knowing is, right? You need some structure. Even if you talk about knowing in the simplest sense, I need to make everything very simple so kids should understand. You go into this medrash, you don't know anyone, the new shtut, the new shil, you don't know anyone, so you start knowing. What does it mean knowing someone? Well, you're gonna start playing Jewish geography, right? So this guy's cousin's uncle's cat was married before the war to the other guy's shtut seruv's misnagit. Therefore, now I know you, right? What do you mean now I know you? What do you know? You know something about him, Kelly, right? But now you have some sort of structure. Okay, there's like a yiches poem somewhere in my head with all the Yidden from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu, and now I know where you fit, right? I know where I am. I know where you are. That's what knowledge is, and that's how all knowledge is basically this. Right? You want to know how magnets work, right? So basically, there's fields and powers, and you building a big tree and putting this into the correct place in the tree. That's basically what knowledge is. That's why there's a shortcut for the Chassidish Yidden, which says that God is the top of the tree, and you just know that, and basically know everything already. That's a shortcut.
How is that a shortcut
correct.
as much as, let's say, an anchor? Like,
No, it's also an anchor. It's also like if you whatever. Let's stop there. The point is, no, it's not. It's gonna. There's the track. It's putting the end before the beginning. Can't do that. So knowledge means structured knowledge. Which is another way of saying, before you know something, you need to know to what science this belongs, right? Because this is based, and in some sense, this is all you ever know. Like if you ask me what are tables, or how tables work, or how telephones work, right? You can't really ask that question. Or the way to ask that question would be to say, well, telephones are part of this thing called computer science, and computer science is part of this thing called, I don't know, mathematics maybe. And mathematics is part of something, nobody knows what. And that's basically how it works, right? Well, there's also the material science part of it and so on. So now then you could drill down from that big cloud, and you go down, okay, there's science, and then there's this program language, and there's this thing, and basically that's how it works. That's what knowledge is, right? So this is all another way of saying that when you start to want to know something, you can't be a baby and keep on saying, well, how does it work? Just tell me, like, you have to have words, you have to have a framework, you have to have a system, you have to have a library where to put the books in, where to put the knowledge in, where to put the things in. Which is another way of saying that we need a starting point. You can't start everywhere. Because start everywhere, like I could say, the best thing, I could just give you a list of everything, which is totally not. Maybe if you're like, maybe there's some way of knowledge that, not human, that could handle that, but human knowledge at least doesn't work that way. Or is impossible. Just that's not what it is. So you need to basically have some sort of way, place to start, like some sort of, at least, like what what part of knowledge is about, right? You need to start cutting up the world. And
there's a prior question, I mean, maybe it's part of the same thing, which is which areas, when you focus on them, answer things broadly instead.
Yeah, it turns out that the question is just the answer, most of the answer, which is another way of saying that you can't really start on your own, or you could start on your own. But it's another way of saying that everything that everyone else ever said about this, at least, and this is at least, is at least you need it because it frames your questions, which is the only way that you could start thinking. And then you could start saying, well, your categorization of the world is incorrect, you should cut it up differently. Well, but then you're really handling two different systems and comparing them. You can't start from zero. There's no view from nowhere, right? There's no zero starting point anywhere, as Descartes found out, because even his totally doesn't work. So there isn't such a thing. So this is another way of saying that looking what other people do is like basically the most rational thing you can do, unlike what some modern people have, this Descartes fantasy. It's because it's just like saying, if you want to know what a table is, look on the bottom of the table. Well, who says look at the bottom? Like you have this idea of foundation of knowledge or foundation of anything, right? Well, how does the house work? Well, it starts with the foundation. Who said? Start from the chimney. Ich weiß nicht. That's what a house is. If knowledge is a structured understanding of the universe, then at least one place to start is what all the other knowers said about it. Because they're the ones that give you the structure. Because that's a place where to start. It's like you need premises, you need somewhere to start from. Even if they're not premises, you need ends, you need facts, you need somewhere to start from. You can't start from nowhere. There's no starting from nowhere. And then you also might realize where they went wrong. That's also useful. But that's why and Aristotle, this was his method in general, as should be most smart people's method. Any science that he started, he's tried to start with like saying what the science is, and he sort of did that by telling you what other people said or at least, and he tries. One thing he tries to do very much is out of the things that they say to try to figure out what questions they're actually asking, because he's something he doesn't believe most of the time their answers. He thinks that they're at least incomplete, almost always. But he definitely thinks that they're like pointing. They're giving you handles on the question. They're like giving you places where to look. Make sense? And then very interestingly, so I have to tell you this what he's here. So this, if you look in the Sefer HaNefesh, the Rabbeini. Reb Aristo wrote a cipher called Sefer HaNefesh. Has gered even? If you were to be the B'nai Saschi, you would have never heard of it, and you would be hacking on philosophy. You know, right? But since we're not the B'nai Saschi wrote. Yeah. Sure. So, but if you're not the B'nai Saschi, at least you know such a cipher. And this cipher goes like this: the first shot is what everyone else said about the soul. And it's important, like I just told you, because he said for these two reasons. One, to find out where they're wrong, and if they're wrong, it'll help us by telling us what's wrong, and if they're right, but really more deeper, he's trying, and he explicitly does this in the first book, he tries to show you what kind of question they're asking, which is really how he's going to frame his questions and show you like, okay, so the soul is such a kind of thing. Okay, now it's such a kind of thing. Now we can start thinking, what does it really mean to be such a kind of thing? Maybe there's a big need for a bigger framework and a smaller, and we could cut up differently. And so on. Then he gets the Shar Bais or Hanichri book Bais. He says, okay, now I told you what everyone else said. I'm gonna have to start again. And I start again, meaning by just starting clean. Like I'm gonna give you my own opinion. But he calls it starting fresh. And this parish from Reb Thomas Aquinas says, oh, you know why I really would like this pshat. He said, why does we have to start again? Because since it's such a hard subject, we should probably assume that nobody figured out the answer yet. So it's worth to start again fresh. Okay, so this was all Akdama to also explain that we should say what other people said, and not only like pretend to start from fresh or pretend to read philosophy or whatever thoughts written only in the last 45 years, because that's contemporary. Otherwise, just reading the history of philosophy. There was a guy in my Twitter, I don't know, I wrote an article that you should not read the history of philosophy because philosophy is about finding out the truth. So it's very tzurichin why we should read this article. Like, if it was written today, but it's 6 months ago, and if you, like in journals, they publish things only like 2 years later, like, it's a history already, I don't care what you say. So that's one problem. But there's a more different problem. Yeah. Yeah, and it's very important that, like, I gave you these three ekdamas last time, I think, or maybe in my other class. There were all these thoughts about what the soul, and there were people wondering about it for a long time. And the Aristotelian story about it, Aristotle's story, which is more or less from the book De Anima, or On the Soul, was the account that basically everyone worked with for 1,000 years at least. And that means at least that if you want to work with anything that you read, if you read Tanya, it's basically Aristotle with some modifications. If you read Nefesh HaChaim, it's basically Aristotle with some modifications. If you read Rambam, it's of course Aristotle with modifications. If you read Zohar, it's Aristotle with some Plato, and so on. So if you want to understand anything, not only historically, but also what's history is one thing that's interesting, but I'm even more interested in what is causing them to say all these things. We have this tendency of reading everything dogmatically. Like the Rambam says this, and he got it from there, If you're frame, then you're worried. Wait, he got it from a guy. He got it from a guy. I don't care. But what's the point? The point of getting it is that there was reason, there were motivations at least. There were reasons why they got told these thoughts, and everyone is pushing it into different directions because of different problems they have and different so to speak needs that they want to get out of it. But these are the basic thoughts that everyone is working with, so it's important for that reason, at least for that reason. Okay, and it's also important for at least two other reasons. One is that Aristotle at least thinks that he's making a lot of sense, and he's thinking very much from basic principles, very Balabatish thoughts, and I did a whole sheet in Bar Park last week to explain why Aristotle is Balabatish and not like Kabbalah. It's a whole sheet. I can't chazer that. I don't think I did very arichas in Bar Park in Yiddish. And secondly, at least according to some people, because it might might actually give you a way out of contemporary puzzles about the soul. If you read anything about dualism and versus materialism and so on, all of these shittas seem to have basic holes, and at least the Aristotelian Chassidim pretend that their Rebbe already 2,000 years ago or 3 had a mahalach that doesn't have all these kashas, right? These people that say that. If it's true or not is another whole discussion and another whole zman to learn, and in what way it's true, because obviously it has some incorrect scientific information. So does that freg up? Does it not? Get back to the same challenge about Moshe Rabbeinu, But it's good questions. So that's the basic reasons. Okay. So now, Bekitzer, we got to get into the actual thing. So the actual thing is like this. Oh, here's my notes. The actual thing is something like this. What are we holding about the actual thing?
Last class?
Atkan is the Agdoma.
We spoke about. The 3 parts was. That was 2 weeks. It was 2 weeks ago. Okay,
I'll try to give you to start from the beginning also. The actual thing is something like this. Let's say something that again Aristotle himself says, and it makes a big difference. There's these classic questions about the soul, of which I could tell you 12 of them. Does the soul survive the death of the body? Very important. Everyone wants to know for some reason. For religious reasons or some for curiosity reasons, and so on. There's a question, which is sort of the same question, what is the relation between the body and the soul? What does it mean to have a soul? And so on. All these kinds of questions. Okay, if you read...
What's the question? I understand how to form the question. The soul...
Yeah, you don't have to do... This is a bad way of formulating the question. The real way to say it was, do people survive death?
Is there a soul?
Okay. But there's definitely a soul in the sense of people are definitely alive. The question is just if they die. So whenever I say the word soul, change it to the word life. Very important. At least human life. Because soul is already, at least the way we read it, it's already a teretz. There was already a whole sheet about this.
Mm-hmm.
There was already a whole sheet about this. That soul is the shala, not the teretz. At least in ancient
ways.
Philosophy. Yeah, I'm going to have to get to this. Right, but Bekitzer, it's a good shala, but the teretz says that the word soul over here doesn't mean a neshama. Very important. That means whatever it means to be alive. Or whatever it means for a human to be alive. Okay? And the shala is if you actually die. If you read Socrates, Plato, and Phaedo, and a few other dialogues, that's basically the question that he's worried about. Socrates is dying over there in the Baisa Asirim, and the shayla is if he's actually going to die. That's the basic question. Should he be afraid of it? Should he run away? Should he not? All these things. But the metaphysical question that he's really interested in is: does he survive death? Does he die? The word soul is weird. This is just another way of saying: is the soul separate from the body? According to Plato. In other words, obviously the body or the flesh and stuff doesn't stay. We could see what happens with it. So that's not really the question. But the question is if there's something alive in you which stays alive? That's the question. And the Philo went on and trying to prove this. This is what we call the immortality of the soul, right? And worrying about this. Some people are worried, like some people are worried because it says in the Rambam that maybe it says in the Rambam, or Chvais in the Chumash, they think it says that the soul doesn't die, so we need to prove the Chumash right, or just in general. Now, Aristotle actually very clearly says that he is less interested in this question, at least in this book. Less interested in this question because he thinks that this is a too mitzimtzum question. Very clearly, he says that you're asking a question that's way too late, like you're starting in the end. And he says what we really need to ask is basically, what is the soul? Or another way of saying, what is it to be alive? Because if you take out this word soul, anima, which is a soul, it just means alive. What?
He's also to what kind of categories with the soul?
Yeah, wait. But what he's saying, he says this explicitly. He says Lemushal explicitly that everyone is only worried about the human soul, but why? I mean, it seems that plants are alive. It seems that animals are alive. So why is everyone only worried about them? They're just very selfish. They care only about people. But if you're doing science, and again, if you want to understand everything, remember we want to understand everything. We don't just want to know, do I actually go to Gan Eden? That's a very small question. The whole idea of knowledge is to know everything. So you don't just want to know if people go to Gan Eden. You want to know what everything is. And part of everything is life, otherwise known as soul. Or at least the question is that question. And it doesn't seem to be that life is something particular to humans. Maybe there's a kind of life that's particular to humans. Okay, maybe. But there's at least life, just as it is life. There's all kinds of life. Well, what exactly is life? Whatever. But there's such a thing as life. And he says this, so we need to start our question much earlier. That's very important. So he gets a new question. He really wants to know what animals' souls are and what plant souls are. This is his chiddush. Nobody before him thought about this. He claims, whatever. He says that it's his chiddush, and maybe it's not true. And this is a very important change. This is a very important switch that I think I spoke about a little already. This is a very important switch precisely because it makes it a science about everything or all living things. So this becomes like the principle of biology, basically. And it's explicitly for him, what he wants to know about the soul is he wants to know what's the yesod of biology. There's such a science. Biology has biology, right? The science of living things, biologos. And he wants to know what is the klal of living things. Now, what does it mean by principle? So this is another important thing, right? Like, and he says it's important. We have to ask, and this is why he ends up. He says, "I have another question for you." And my question is, now that you understand there's life, a lot of things are alive, are all of them the same, right? Is there one logos of life, one account, one science of life, one kind of life for animals, for cats and rats and humans, or are there different kinds? You could ask if there's different kinds for young people and old people, also, and so on, or for different parts or different things that humans do, right? Is there a different kind of life that makes you think, that's thinking, and that's different kind of life as feeling and walking and sensing and so on? And that's what this question comes out of, his broadening of the question and saying that this is really a question of about the principles of life, about the principles of the science of all living things. And what this also does is it very much changes the focus. And this is important because this leads us into later big controversies about what is actually going to be like the religious kind of truth. It gives you a very different kind of view about the question of like the question that everyone is like the burning question that everyone has: do I survive death? Does my old Baba really going to have Tchias Amayim or not? It takes away the focus of that question. It makes that question, it's a good question. It's bad as a good question as like, how many legs do ants have and why? It's very important detail about life. There's life, and in life there's insects, and in insects there's ants, and there's 16,000 different kinds of ants, and each one we have to know about exactly how it works. I'll get, but this is scientific. Science is not a good word. I mean, it's the Latin word that was translated, but nowadays it means something else. But it's it's a very different
intellectual body.
Yeah, gives you very different connotations. At least it's a very different kind of drive. Like know everything, then just. And it's true, I think he's right in this like broadening of, if you want to know things, again, if you want to prove that your Baba, you're going to see her again, or if you're worried about your religion being true and all things like that, then you're having a very limited and small question. But if you just to make that scientific in the sense of making that part of all knowledge of everything, so you have to see it in the context of everything. And then it becomes a small part. Now, there might be an important part because it has to do with you, so you have Nagias, but it becomes a very small part. And what also becomes is that we have to, in other words, what it is to be a soul. This is actually going to be his answer. His answer is going to be that what it is to be a soul is the same for most things. There's differences, there's specific differences, and different kinds of differences, and it becomes a controversy exactly how to interpret it. But in general, what it is to be a soul, which is the question that he asked before, people didn't ask that, they just assumed there's such a thing as life, and does it survive or not? That's how he claims, at least, right? Everyone before him wasn't really worried. Even if they did, they now were focused on that. But he wants to know what it is to be. And what it is, what kind of thing a soul is something for him very broad. It's at least, and again, there might be some detail. There might be, and this, we're not going to talk about this today, and not like for the next, that's another whole thing. There might be some part of the human soul, or some aspect of it, which is immortal, like the Kabbalah, like the Messiah is, and so on, which is the intellect, and all of that. But that's not what he's mainly focused on. In his whole book about the soul, it has like 2 chapters that talk about this, and nobody knows what it says in them. So,
can you talk about where it originates from?
Well, we have to first know what it is. I don't know what you mean by originates from, where it comes from.
Yeah.
What does it mean where it originates from?
Where does it come from?
What's the cause?
That means, yeah,
what do you mean?
Cause, exactly. Like,
yeah, just like for everything else.
There's a baby in the stomach. All of a
yeah,
sudden,
not much. But you have to frame the question correctly. So if to think if that's a good question, but that's not what he's wondering. Again, you're assuming that there's such a thing. Wait 1 second. Remember that when you were asking where does it come? There's a baby and the soul comes. Well, you just assumed so many assumptions that I don't even know where to start. There's babies and souls have to come. I don't know. Where did you get this idea?
If life means soul, and soul is separate from.
It comes from the mother.
So
what's the baya? It comes from the mother.
What do you mean it comes from the mother?
Well, life. Babies are not born. Babies are not. If you would ever see an inanimate thing becoming animate, you would have a question. But I never saw that happening.
That's basically what is happening.
No, babies are alive from the first. Okay, don't ask the Supreme Court. But babies are alive, at least alive in the biological sense. They come out of life, right? They were never dead. They were never inanimate matter. Nobody really says that. Shal is it's a human life. Even the Supreme Court has a shal of human life. Not a question of life.
If you tell me that they can separate, which afterlife they do.
Who? I didn't say anything. You see, this is the thing that he thinks is jumping very quickly. You already know what life is, and if it separates, you already have a certain anacha. You're like, there's such a thing, life, and where does it come and where does it go? And it's very different before you're born, after you're born. I don't know any of these things. Again, I'm asking you about a plant. I want to know in what sense this thing is alive.
It is part of
because it's alive. What?
It is part
yeah,
of
of course. Well, philosophers, whatever is in front of them becomes the mushal. That's why most of philosophy is about tables and chairs. Because boring philosophers are in the classroom all the time. If they would do like the Zohar and go on walks, then it would be more interesting. You can't ask this question before you know what you're even talking about. And maybe according to what's going to talk about, the question is not going to make any sense. Or maybe yes, and then we'll have the question.
You mentioned that after death.
No, what I mentioned is, I didn't say that. I didn't say anything like that. I said that the opposite. I said that he defocuses this question, at least in this book. He might have written other books focused on that question, which we don't have. But at least in this book, we defocus the question very clearly because we're asking a scientific question. What is life in general? And we need a definition of life in general. Maybe we could narrow that to a definition of human life in general. And maybe after that we'll find that there's one part of human life that does survive death, and emes mashal masri rabbesaini, also Rabbi Yosef Shlaristo. It's not only, but that's the smallest thing. And there's like I said, there's 2 chapters in the book that seem to talk about it. He talks about it the whole time, but there's like 2 chapters and nobody knows what it says in those chapters. And those 2 chapters gave birth to like 10,000 books arguing what he says. And that's not our subject for today, because we still need to know the first, the thing that makes you think less about this. What did I do? We'll do it again, I'll understand it better. It's not about what happens when you die, okay? That's not what we have to first know. We have to first know what happens when you're alive. What is that? And you're not the only thing that's alive, because chickens and grass are alive, so what's that? Then we'll think about what happens when they die and when you die and so on. Nine? Okay, Shine. So that's the basic chiddush the basic switch and frame. He's taking you into a very different framing, right? Now, another thing that happens from this, and this is important, and going in the other way, in the other direction, right? So now he's going to say, and everyone knows the basic answer, right? There's such a thing called matter and form. Everything in the world has that, right? And living things have a specific kind of form, and that specific kind of form is known as the soul. And this is not very interesting. Again, it's interesting insofar as the thing is interesting, right? Interesting things have interesting forms just because they're interesting things, but it's not like a special thing that only humans have or anything like that. It's special insofar as humans are special. If their body, if their whatever it is to be a human is special, then that's going to have a special kind of form. But it's not a special kind of thing, right? It's the same kind of thing as the form of any living thing, or maybe as the form of anything. Even dead things have forms, so even of that. Okay? And to get into this exactly, maybe we'll have time. But that's the basic story. Now I have to get to the end because this is important to getting at what I want to get today mostly. Now, what this also means is also on the detail part. In other words, let me explain. If you already assume that the whole question of the soul, like most modern people assume that the only question is about the mind, not about life, right? Another very big chilek, and there's a chilek not only between him and everyone before him, but also between him and everyone in the last since Descartes, right? And some other people, where they assume that life is accounted for, just being alive. That's called biology, nothing to do with the soul. Biology doesn't have the soul as its principle. At least modern Darwinian biology, so to speak, at least doesn't have that, right? So we don't have a problem with what life is. Nobody thinks that that's a problem. You should ask your rabbi. That you should ask their local life science professor. And so there's one thing that life science professor doesn't know how to explain, which is starts with a C.
Consciousness.
Yeah, and that thing is the neshama. Or at least since it's two things that we don't know about, we might as well be mishadach them, you know? Okay. But the point is that this is like the only riddle that's left. Okay? And that's a question. So for this we need philosophy, because philosophers are good for talking about riddles that no scientists know. At least, we don't know if they're good, but at least they're the only ones talking about it. Scientists pretend to talk, but they just don't say anything, so that's not even. But Kitzer, that's how most modern people, in other words, and this is also how most modern people think of the soul. In most ways, they say the soul is the mind or the consciousness. Nobody knows what consciousness is, but that's another. Not only they don't know where it comes from, they basically don't know what it is even. Qualia, right? What is that? Maybe even at that, but I don't even know if that's a good question. But and most people when they qualia is a very restricted thing. That's what philosophers talk about. Most people when they say consciousness means something much broader, and then I totally don't know what they're talking about. But the point is, this is a question about the mind, right? Now, this is, again, much more limited question, the question that Aristotle had. For Aristotle, of course, the mind is an important part, and again, Metz Hashem will do a whole thing to figure that out. But it's not different, it doesn't have a different structure from everything else. We don't have to invent a new kind of being, at least maybe in some sense, but new kind of way of explaining things, at least we don't have to invent for the mind. However, we explain life in a body, we explain life of the mind, which may be a different kind of life, maybe it's a different quality of life, maybe it's immortal and every other life is mortal, which is what everyone that tries to say this says, but it's still going to work with the same concepts. We don't need new concepts. Unlike all of the modern philosophy, which assumes that the mind needs special concepts, needs a special area of study, and that's what people put the neshama into that, and so on. That's going to be very different. Very different. Another way of saying this, and this is important, another way of saying this is, and maybe it's the same exact thing, and maybe it's slightly different, but it's important to understand how he thinks about it. Another way of saying this is that according to Aristotle, soul is just what it is to be alive. Okay? What it is another way of saying form, right? Just the same word. What it is to be alive, or what it is for a body to be alive. We can get into the exact language and exactly what all these things mean. But that's what it is. Now, for him, what is it to be alive? Now, this is a very interesting question, again, because is there such a thing as being alive, which is different than doing what living things do? What is I just keep on saying this word, life. Just not a very general word, right? What is life? Is there such a thing as life? That's basically the same thing as there's such a thing as soul, which is separate, like we usually imagine the story. Anyone that has an imagination of the soul is like Rav Sadi going story, right? When you die, there's we need to open the window, so the soul should go out, so on. Yeah, it's not such a thing.
Fit through the window, he said.
Rav Sadi said, no, it fits through the holes and like the cockroaches, they go through the... Yeah, but theoretically, but that's the image that we usually have, right? But that's philosophically what this image means, that there's something called life. Life goes away, it was here, now it's somewhere else. And that somehow makes the things that you do when you're alive, right? It causes them, we don't know how, but it causes them the things that you do when you're alive, right? Now, this is the main thing.
We're thinking.
Exactly. This is the main thing that Aristotle is not agreeing with, doesn't agree with, because of how he understands form, but we're going to skip that for now. But because of how he broadens this question into a scientific question. Because according to him, and maybe according to other people also, but definitely according to him, life it just means the things that living things do. In other words, what does it mean to be alive? No, you know. There's 3 kinds of life, right?
Right.
You know. So what does it mean to be alive?
Life.
Okay. So what does it mean to be alive? Well, we could start to analyze it.
It moves.
Right? It means at minimum, like in a plant, which is the minimal thing of being alive, it means, what does it mean?
It means it has an internal motion.
No. Well, no. Internal motion is not the definition of life. That's the definition of nature. You're ready to step ahead. Rocks also have internal motion.
If you want the biology answer is reproduction.
Okay, reproduction. No, that's something that he cares about actually also. I don't know if that's the biology answer.
It grows.
Nobody knows if biology doesn't.
It grows, right? Living things grow.
Okay, they grow and reproduce. That's true.
Right.
So that's something that, in general, like we could, yeah, it's a good definition.
Nourish themselves, right?
For the most place, living things reproduce and dead things don't. Non-living things, okay? So that's what it means to be alive. Now this is very important. This is very important. According to him, there is not liveness. Take this as the minimum, and it's true, right? Even plants reproduce, so that's the minimum. And Aristotle says this. What he calls the plant soul is reproduction and nourishment, right? They grow and they're produced. Well, growing is maybe the wrong word, but we say homeostasis. They keep themselves in a certain like growth. By receiving some nourishment and doing what they do. Growth is misleading because growth sounds like we're talking about a person growing bigger. It doesn't mean growing bigger, right? It means sustaining itself. It's very clear. But okay, this is the nourishment, what's called the nourishing soul or the reproducing soul, all these kind of things, right? Nahi in the language of the Arizal, or nefesh. And now what's the point? But what the point I want to make is that this is not something plus life. Well, modern scientists basically think like this, and everyone thinks that they're wrong because they don't have a neshama. But Aristotle says this is the neshama, or this is the soul. In other words, there isn't an activity of life plus something that makes it happen. Because that's very weird. It only makes more puzzles, only makes more weirdness.
Saadi had a problem with this, right? He said it's just naming it.
I don't know. I don't know if anything explains anything. But I'm telling you that's what he said. No, he said something. He was talking about something else. Sadia didn't say. You could ask this kasha. Don't say names.
I understand.
What I'm trying to say is that the things that living things do, that's what life is. Now, of course, it needs to have a cause. I don't disagree that we need to have a cause of that.
So then you're not alive?
Yes, not then you're alive. That is what it is.
No, then you're not alive?
In other words,
I am not capable of.
No, there is no then I'm alive.
Well, yes, of course. I mean, yes, of course.
So a Sudus isn't a lebendige Mensch.
No, Hamol, he's missing part of his life, of course.
A part?
Yeah, we have to, yes. The answer is yes, but it's complicated, and I'll get to this in a minute. The answer is yes.
No, but that
in other words, to the extent, okay, it's true, right, we have to have a good chat. What does that mean to be what does that exactly mean? We have to figure that out philosophically. But the point is, yes, but the answer is that, in other words, let's say someone thinks this is, I'll give you the top, right? Let's say we have these classic 3 levels of being alive, right? There's reproduction and nourishment, and what's the next one? Thing that animal does that plants don't do. Is there such a thing?
Excretion?
Plants do that.
That's what I was getting at.
They can move into from its place.
Yeah, they move in place. That was one of the main things that Aristotle said. But also they have more senses. Plants don't really have senses, maybe in very limited sense, but they don't really sense things. They don't have perception. All animals have perception and movement, which are connected to each other, because in order to move, you need to like sort of somehow know what you're doing, where you're going, right? So that's animals. Maybe they have feelings and imagination, even more stuff. So animals have more life, different kinds of life, right?
I don't know if I'm trying. I want to go back to the plant for a second. When you see a plant and then it's dead, which is, let's say it instantly dies. Then it moves on from being a living thing. Is that how you're saying it? Because it stops
existing. The living thing stops existing. It just stops existing. Yeah. Now there's something else there.
Something else, right?
It has the same name. It doesn't even have the same name, but it has a similar name. But it's a different thing.
It's a better question because then they're not talking about neshama's going somewhere.
Yeah, it's a different thing. It's a different thing. In other words, let's say like this. You don't have to talk. It's the same. If you think like the way he thinks is something like this. If you ask what happens when it goes away, when I have a table, right? This is the matter and form story. This is the question of all change. When I have a table and I break it and I make it into mulch wood, where did the table go? Didn't get enough tables. Where's it going? It didn't go anywhere. Well, by the way, this is a serious philosophical question. It's not a joke question.
Yeah. Well, where did
they were worried. Where did the table go? So it just became nothing. So we could destroy. And when I make a table, it becomes from, where did it come from? Right? I mean, we did this enough times.
Like where the hole in the donut went.
Basically. No, it's a serious question. And the answer, no, I'm not going to repeat this problem of change right now. But this was known as the problem of change. I don't know, I just made up this word. Is that how it's called? It's the problem of change in ancient philosophy. Is a big problem. Physics, but not only it's by the way, it's a problem for modern physics too. We think that we have an answer to it, but it's a serious question. It's a scientific question. Where does it go? It's not a joke question. Just remember, we already have in our head a lot of theories that answer this. Well, the atoms just rearrange themselves in something. That's an answer to the question. It's a very good answer. It's an answer as old as the Marquarist. It's an old answer.
That's what that Berkeley.
I'm not getting into if it's a good answer, but I'm saying when you think it's a dumb question, beware of anyone that says that question is dumb. I already told you it's a lot of that's one of the insiders in this shit. Because there's not a dumb question. You're just assuming an answer. If I ask you where the whole is done, that's a very serious question. You just think that you know the answer. The answer is that the whole never basically existed, right? I could tell you the answer, right? There was no such thing. There's no such thing. There's no entity known as donut holes. Well, there is. You can find them in the store, but they're fake, right? They're just small donuts. But they're holes. There's no entity known as donut holes, and the donut hole is just an attribute of the donut, right? Something like that. Okay, now you have just the whole sheet of philosophy. Man, that's not a stupid question. There's a good question and a good answer. Right? And where did now I ask you a better question. Where did the shape of the donut go when it stopped going? I know where the piece of the donut went, right? But I don't know where the shape of the donut went. That's basically the question of this. So the tenet is, at least Aristotle's tenet is, that it stopped existing. It didn't go anywhere. This is what's known as the form and the matter. Well, you could sort of say it went back into the matter, but it's a weird thing to say.
So you can't say that the shape was destroyed?
Yeah, it was destroyed. That's what he says. It does destroy means it's zero. It doesn't exist. It stopped existing. Okay? Now the matter didn't stop existing, which is in some sense it still exists, and in a sense in all kinds of ways. But it stopped existing. So in the same sense, when the plant was alive and it stopped being alive, that's the same question of where the whole of the donut went, right? It just stopped existing. Life doesn't exist anymore here. In other words, living plants, they're not here. What's here? Well, something that made up the living plant. It could decompose and become into another plant. It has some attributes of matter. It has something to do with the plant. It's not totally nothing to do, but it's not just stopped existing, right?
Does Newton's law fit into this at all?
Yeah, that's a different answer to the same question. Has a different answer, Newton. Yeah, Newton has a different answer. He's I don't know what the conservation of matter and stuff. They just assume that there's no real change. According to them, that it's a little different. That nothing really was destroyed. It was just reorganized in space. But yeah, at least Newton thinks like this. The Newtonian kind of account of the world thinks that there's no real change. There's no real what's called substantial change in philosophy. Nothing really changes. Things just change place, right? The things that make up the things, basically, the small level thing, the micro things don't change. They just rearrange themselves. And even the energy and so on, but that's basically what, yeah. So that's a version of a very ancient theory again.
Interesting way of putting it,
yeah. Yeah, but Newton himself, the people themselves, they said that this was the ancient atomic theory, that nothing really changes, or at least on the lower level, right? On the higher level it changed, but it's not a way of saying it just looks like it changes, but it doesn't really
for him
change.
there is no form of the table, right?
Yeah. Well, also,
okay.
Also, well, but kids, I can't. I'm just this is just good to have clarity to compare it. That's true that according to the modern physics, maybe according to quantum physics, there is change, but according to regular physics, regular mechanics, there is no change. There's only change in space, in place. There's no things don't become different things ever. Whatever it means. No, like you're saying, what does it mean to be a thing? I don't know where I got to this. Point is that when something dies, according to the general account of form and matter, when something stops having the form, it goes nowhere. It doesn't go. It just is destroyed. Zero. It went from 1 to 0. Well, the matter goes on and so on, but the form gets destroyed. Forms are the thing that come into existence and stop existing. And now, where do they come from? That's the causality story. Right. So this is important. In other words. And if you understand life as just the things that life does, and life is to reproduce, life is to move in place. Life is for humans to think, maybe, or to imagine at least. Let's leave out thinking because that has its own thing. But life is to plan, to sense, to go to the Rebbe whatever. All these kind of things. Though you stop doing them, they don't go anywhere. What I'm trying to get at is that life is a kind of activity. This is important. Because if life is what living things do, and living things are things that do, right? Very important. They're basically all kinds of doing, right? But they're things that do. They're not inert, right? So in other words, they have activity. They're active. So life is a kind of activity. That's where I'm trying to get. And for activities, it doesn't really make sense to ask where they go when they stop. You stop doing them, right? They don't go anywhere. They just stop. So life is something that living things do. That's what being alive means. It means that you do a certain thing. Okay? So in the most general sense, the question, and this he says, the question of like where, when doesn't begin. The question is where, what it is. But there is an interesting question what it is when it's alive. So the question of where it goes is a fake question. There's a way. He does have a way of saving the immortality of the soul, but we'll get to that. But in general, if talking about the soul on this level, just the question doesn't begin. Unless you really think that maybe, unless in whichever sense the tables go on existing, and they do in people's memories and so on, all kinds of ways, but they don't continue to exist. This is push-up shot in Aristotle, the push-up shot. So now,
can I ask, I'm going ahead, but let's say, just is there an answer to this question?
To which question?
To his question.
Which is?
What is this, like, what is...
Yeah, what it is. Yeah, well, of course. You have to answer what it is. This is just saying what it does,
but
that it's doing.
Saying, does he get to an answer?
Yeah.
Sometimes they get, and then
I'm gonna get to it.
And then what does that mean? That I can't even build on that.
You can't even go to sleep? No, I have a teretz. So I'm going to say the teretz today. At least the words. I don't know if it's a teretz, but I can tell you the words. But what I was saying is that number one, let me just repeat because I keep on losing myself and everyone else. What I was saying is, number one, he has a much broader story of what a soul is, because it's life, and all kinds of life have the same question. And I'm going to be clear, it's not all kinds of things that move, because they move in a different way than living things move. I'm not going to say that for now, but all kinds of life have the same kind of question. And secondly, that life is just what living things do. Which leads us to do, and again, which leads us to understand his book. Because his book called On the Soul is basically a book, most of it, besides the first 2 chapters, which talk about what the definition of the soul in general is. The rest of it is about things like reproduction and movement and sensation and thought and imagination. That's basically what the whole book is about. It's about how senses work. A lot of it, like one of the big things that people hear about the book is they try to talk about how the eye works. Not in the biological sense, in like a sort of philosophical sense, but what does it mean to see? What does it mean to sense? What does it mean to perceive? What does it mean to think? And if you don't have this understanding of soul, this doesn't make any sense. Like I came to find out what a neshama is, and you're giving me psychology or, I don't know, biology, something like that. But for him, and there's also biology, and we have to understand exactly which part belongs to biology and which part, but the general story of what it is for a living thing to live, right? What it is for a living thing to move, what it is for a living thing to sense, what it is for a living thing to think, is what a soul is. These are just like more detailed level. In general, the soul is the life of the living thing. And in more detail, for a plant, it's the movement. So I have to explain you what movement is. And for whatever, and so on. And for an animal, it's perception. And for a human, it's the things that make humans special, and so on. Stimmt? Yeah. Why am I saying all of this? Because maybe like this, I could explain is very basic definition of what this whole thing is. So, and this is at least the way. If let me look in my. Yeah. So, I don't remember. I did the 4 things last week, so I'm sort of skipping to the last thing. But I think that this is a good way to skip to it. If you look in the last week's class, I give 4 akdamas, 4 things. Where is it? 4 things that. 4 bigger concepts that could explain what kind of thing a soul is, right?
Right, it's a matter form.
The 4 things are substance versus accidents, matter versus form, potentiality versus actuality, and then 2 kinds of actuality, which is where I'm up to right now. Okay, but let me try to explain it from where I am. So I'm skipping the substance things and all of that, not exactly for now, but I said all of this to explain what we say when he says, then this is his that the soul is the first actuality of a living body, which is potentially actual, right? Perish HaMeles is, I remember, let's start from the end, right? So being alive, actually life is doing things, okay? Doing things that we could call activity, right? That's another word. Doing things. So, for example, let's take, and he uses this example, so I'm going to use it also. For example, if being active as a human is thinking, okay?
The
So
guitar player example is very good.
Which player?
Piano player.
Oh wait,
That's
but
very
now I'm
good
talking about
example.
thinking, because it's the Rebbe's the Mushal. We have to do a Lucian Rebbe. No, it helps. It's a lot of people use it and so on. You like the guitar person, but thinking. 1 second, I want to know because this is important that everyone should understand. I think it's an activity because we seem to not realize that for some reason. I don't know why. Thinking is an activity. Okay. In other words, thinking, and I'm very clear, right? Because thinking, when I say thinking, and when I say thinking, what do I mean? Because thinking is a very tricky word. For example, let's try to clarify it. For example, if I go do the chiles, okay? What do you think of the guy that was elected yesterday? No, I'll give you a better example. What does he think about it? Right? Well, you know what I would tell him? He's sleeping. He's not thinking. Happens to be asleep now. He's not thinking. Why you ask me a nonsense question? It's 12 o'clock at night. All the normal people are sleeping. Only a few crazy people are still up talking about the election. I'm trying to show you why thinking is an activity. If I go to you to 2 o'clock in the a.m. and I say, what does Yankel think of the elections? You know what you should answer me? He's sleeping, he's not thinking. Maybe he's dreaming about it, but he's probably not but he's not thinking, right? What do you mean what he thinks? It's like you ask me, which car, on which bus is he now? I don't know, he's not on a bus, maybe he's in his bed.
The correct way would be, what do you think he thought before he went to sleep?
Oh, so I don't know, I'm not trying to fix people's grammar. What I'm trying to get at is
Get me in trouble.
that the word... No, don't do it.
I'm going to get punched in the face.
No, I'm trying to bring out, my mushal is just trying to bring out that when we say the word thinking, we tend to think that it makes sense in this way. And we really need a different word for what I'm trying to get at, or the same word. When we say thinking, we sort of say, what is his opinion of it, right? Now, where's this opinion when he sleeps? I don't know, somewhere in his soul, right? That's where I'm trying to get you at his soul. But the point is that thinking the activity and thinking the not activity, I don't know what it is. You need to figure out what it is. There are two different things. Like when I say, what does he think about it? Sometimes when I ask you, what do you think? You know, Facebook used to have a thing, what are you thinking? Maybe they do still, I don't remember. What's on your mind? You don't remember? I don't know if they still have it. Do they still have it?
I think it was gone 5 years of updates ago.
I'm a different generation. It used to be that you go on Facebook, it said, what are you thinking right now? Or what are you thinking about? What's on your mind?
It's more like Reddit now.
But the point is, and they wanted you to answer the question and write a post so they could make money. But the point is, I don't know, I'm not thinking anything. They don't really mean what I'm thinking, right? What do they mean? Just say some words, I don't know. Yeah, what's your stance? What's your opinion? Put some words into here so we could, do something with it. But that's a very different kind of thinking than thinking. Okay? Now, very important, if you see, and this is important, if you see life as a kind of actuality, being alive, again, we could define it very low. Being alive is breathing, but breathing is something that you do. Well, maybe not consciously, you don't choose to do, but it's something that you do. If you stop doing it, if you just are able to, if you would just be breathing in the sense that you have an opinion of the election guy, you'd be dead, right? Just to be very clear. It's the same verb. There's same verb. Thinking is a verb, right? If I say, what are you thinking? You could even say, what does the dead guy think of you, right? What is his opinion? Well, we assume that he didn't change his opinion since he died, right? But
think of whatever.
Exactly. And we could say, so can I also say, it's also a verb. Can I say, well, is he breathing?
Aristotle, I'd imagine not.
Because you assume that when I say breathing, I mean actually breathing. And when I say thinking, which is a verb also, I don't mean actually thinking. Right? I mean something different.
What he would have thought, or what he potentially thought.
No, he did think. What he did think. That maybe real. In Shiva, there's another word to explain it is my word word that said in Yeshiva, so ich weiß nicht, wie that they said, Alam, what's the Alam Naganev? Remember the Torah about Alam Naganev? This is the same word. It's stolen from Aristotle. There's a word that says that if you pretend to be a Lamden, then you should actually learn. Just like a Ganev is not someone that can Gamvan, a Lamden is someone that Gamvas, right? A Ganev. Lamden is also Ganev. A Lamden is someone, a Ganev is someone who's Gamvan, Nishan was can Gamvan, right? So it's the same thing. That's getting at the same ambiguity in language that I'm getting at you, right? That activity, verbs,
There's only a thief
verbs.
Thieving, right? That's
Exactly. Well, no, maybe not. This is what I'm trying to get at. Theoretically, these are two things. Okay, theoretically, these are two things. Now, what I'm trying to get at here is, this is very important, that when we talk about being alive, and all the things that we talk about being alive, so we seem to be talking about two things. So there is one sense, like you're saying, is he actually reproducing now? Is he, like in the sense of the guy gamvaning? Or is he reproducing in the sense that he could reproduce, right? So if you say living things are things that reproduce, well, no. Living things don't go around reproducing all the time, right? Some of them do, but not all of them do, right? That's how.
It just sounds like a play on language.
No,
You don't. No, not that. I'm saying you don't reproduce all the time, but you have the capacity to.
Okay, wait. And now you're being a philosopher again. I'm saying that it's just language. It's not language. It's the real things. Capacity. You forget. Made a new word called capacity. One of the words that Aristotle invented, or someone like him, and they were saying that okay, so there's something called capacity. Now, but the thing with this capacity is that it's also an active thing, right? It's a kind of activity, but not the same kind of activity as reproducing, right? Because what does this capacity consist of? It doesn't consist. Let's try to say something like this. It doesn't consist. I could go back to my thinking example, right? You could be thinking, because this leads us sort of on what you want to do here. Let me say what you want to do, and this is very important. What you want to do here, to go back to the Ganev Lamd in simple case. What you want to do is say, oh, Baruch Hashem, this is where Aristotle's chilik between potential and actual helps us. Well, the Ganev is actually Gamvaning, and a Lamdan was not actually learning, but he's potentially learning. Why is he called a Lamdan? Because he has the capacity to learn, right? Because he's able to learn, right? In other words, what does it mean able to learn? What does that mean?
You have that skill set.
Exactly, but what's that skill set consist of? It doesn't consist of, what it consists of is defined by being able. That's what potential is. Potential is just a shorter word for I am able to do it if I want to, right? Or if the conditions are correct, right, or whatever, right? That's what potential is. After this is not what we usually. One second, that's what I'm trying to get. But what usually we don't use the word potential this way. But if you think about the concept, you'll notice that this is the same thing as potential. It's the same thing. It's I am able to do it if I want to. So I have the capacity. We usually think of capacity as like something that exists in you, and we could sort of and explain it without reference to the activity, but that's not true. And just trying to clarify mistakes that people are used to thinking differently, but at least in this way. Because like you have the capacity, so you have like the machinery for being a lam. Well, there's no machinery neutrally for being a lam. You have to have practiced it or built those neurons in your mind, whatever they are exactly that you have to do to get to it. But now you have something that's only different. It exists as the potential for something else. I can't find a better way to say it tomorrow. But I don't want to talk about learning. I only want to push piano these days. You understand? What I'm saying, he likes to be a musician. When I say someone's a musician, I don't mean that he's playing music now, although they often do, the people that call themselves musicians. And if you live next to them, you'll hear it in the middle of the night sometimes. But what we really mean is that he's able to play, right? He has a capacity. It's not what is the capacity to play. Maybe if you ask like a neuroscientist, they'll say it's some kind of neurons in your. Oh, wait 1 second. Well, I don't know. But the point is that let's go back. Now, this is where the potential actual is a good way because it shows you how to talk about the same thing in a different like sort of state or in a different aspect. That's the main thing. Let me make it more complicated for you. Because when I'm actually learning, which kind of lamdan am I? They're lamdan was a ken lernen. When he's actually lamdaning, when he's learning, right? So did he change? First he was potential and now he's actual. Well, no, he's still potential lamdan. He still has the capacity to be a lamdan and he's actually using that capacity. But that capacity didn't go away. It didn't like transform into actually learning. It's there. That's very good, very important because you realize that these things are not in time. They're not. Yeah, they don't change. The capacity doesn't go away when you're using it, right? That's what the actuality, potentiality kind of language helps us understand. Right? Now, now we could. Where did I think I'm a little confused, or jumped around. But the point is, the guy that's thinking, he can be actually thinking. He could be able to think, right? Or I'm not sure exactly what we mean when we say he thinks of that when he's sleeping. Like he thought of it yesterday, and he's still. Basically, we could say something like this. I'm not sure if it's the correct translation. Like if you ask him now, he would answer you the same answer. Like so, it's a potential, right? If you were to ask. Now, I would say you should go to the Chiras, right? Potentially he is a Tzioni, but it was never actually a Tzioni, it was potentially, right? That's what it means. If he would have been today. In other words, potentially he could have been. That's what potential means,
Can I
right?
take you back to the piano player for a second?
Yeah.
So you said the piano player. I forgot you were giving an example, but then you said if like some neuroscientists could take a look or something or see it happening in the brain. So
Yeah.
what were you saying there?
Yeah, but neuroscientists can't actually see that. In other words, they can't
So here's
explain
my
that.
question. That there are studies that have shown that.
No, of course you could see it. The problem is not about seeing it. But the problem is that it doesn't make sense without reference to the piano playing. Because I didn't say that it's not in matter. I didn't say that it's that is piano playing somewhere in Olam Atzilis. What I'm saying is that exactly that the meaning of it is the meaning. You could use the word meaning. The meaning of having the neurons organized in a certain way is that it's potentially piano playing. The meaning of that organization or of that whatever structure, you understand? Because otherwise, it's true that there's a structure. I'm not saying that it's lemalam and adas, that you can't see it in your memory. What I'm saying is that it's the potential. There's a relation between these two things, which are necessary to understanding them at least. Maybe even for them existing, but at least for understanding, I could
We never
get you to
discovered
agree.
pianos by doing a brain surgery.
Yeah, I'm not. This is just to clarify. I don't say these things to argue with different shits. I'm just saying to clarify. Now this is now. But now that I'm saying this is potential and actual, you realize that there's another kind of potentiality and actual potentiality, right? Because when your Rebbe went and Chayder said everyone has potential to be the Talmud Chochem, he didn't mean it in the same way that we say that guy potentially a lamb now. Very different, extremely different, right? Because in some sense you could say the whole job of going to yeshiva is to learn how to learn, not to learn, right? Remember? So you need to become a lamb like the Havaman of that Vart, right? You need to become a lamb that could learn. That's very different from being potentially a lamb. So when the first potentially lamb, which your Rebbe tells you could become a lamb, everyone could become a lamb, means to say, well, it also means to say you have some kind of capacity, right? You have enough brain cells or enough whatever it is to become a lamb, right? But it doesn't mean that if you sit down now you could lamb, right? You can't, because you need to go through training. You need to go through a different step. You need to go through a different step of actualization of that capacity, and then by step 3 you'll be able to actually lamb. Stimmt the 3-step process?
It's 2 levels of actualization.
Yeah, it's a very different quality. They're not just like that. They're very different kinds of they're really different kinds of actualization.
What's actually potential?
Or of potentialization. Now you could call them whichever you want, and this is what the point of this whole shtickle Torah is. That's why Aristotle says that the soul, when we call the soul, and this is important because when you say a living thing is defined by having a soul, then we ask his kasha. So okay, so when I'm not living, so what do you mean by living? Well, I could define it at a very low level, and then I won't really have this problem, but only pretend not to have this problem. I could say living is breathing. Well, as long as you're breathing, well, it's also not entirely true because you could live for a few minutes or whatever without breathing. I'll say living is whatever you want, whatever activity you want to define it as. Then you won't sort of have this problem, but then you still won't have a cause for living, right? You won't have the thing that makes you a living, right? And the cause is something like the potential for, right? At least this kind of cause. You might ask where that comes from and so on, but at least on this level, right? Cause is the potential for it is what causes it to be able to happen, right? So in other words, let's say something like that. The soul has to be something akin to the talent for playing piano, right? Because actually playing piano is just the activity, but not all of being alive is actively being alive.
It's the talent of living.
It's sort of different. There's actually living and there's having a talent for living, which is what we mean when we say you have a soul. You're alive, right? Because, for example, if part of living is eating or part of living is reproducing, that's the activity. That's what living is. That's what the activity of living is. Well, people are not always doing that. If activity is thinking, you say humans, and this is important because he defines something that's special for humans, right? The only thing that humans do that animals don't do is thinking. Well, most of the time we're not thinking, so we're not actively being human in those times, right? So what does it mean that I say he has a human soul? This is a problem that people got confused about. But this is not a confusion originally, right? That is the problem.
How do you know that animals don't think?
Okay, I'm not getting into this. Let's say they don't, okay? This is a scientific question. The answer is they don't. Okay, the conscious is not. The point, it's not an important question. The point is if there's such a thing. I'm trying to say, so what we mean really when saying human soul is this thinking soul, we don't mean that he is actively thinking, we mean there's potentially thinking. But wait, if I say potentially, then I'm sort of saying that it's not a thing because I'm saying, well, I mean, in some sense, this table is potentially a human soul. I mean, you could grind it up and eat it, and then it's going to come into a body. So it's also potentially, everything is potentially thinking, right? But that's a different kind of potential. Well, that's a very far example. But even even just a dead body is not potentially a human soul. Well, just because it's dead. It's never going to be alive.
The soul is the framework for life.
Not the framework.
I'm saying the base.
The talent for life.
The talent, yeah.
The capacity, the talent for actually being alive. The capacity for actually living, for doing the activities that living are.
I mean, like a rock.
Yeah, a rock.
Doesn't have the.
A rock doesn't do it, and also can't do it even if he wants.
Right.
And a tree can. The thing that a tree is made of, right? The matter of the tree or the potential that's in that matter can grow. The growing is not what we call soul. That's the main point I'm saying. Because I was saying that life is the growing, but that's not the soul. Because the soul is supposed to be an explanation for the life. It's supposed to be the thing that allows it. Just like the playing piano is not the piano playing talent in the player, right? Yeah, there's a player and he has talent, and that talent allows him or can be actualized by playing piano. In the same way, the capacity to think or the ability to think in a secondary way, in the second actuality, not in the sense that you have a brain that could think or that you have a body that could think, that you have the thing that you would actually have to say that it's organized in the way that allows you to think, whatever. The secondary, this next thing, the next level of organization is what we call a soul.
Is it man or is it individual?
Was?
Is it man or is it individual?
Individual like Yitzchok and Yankel? Ich weiß nicht. Das ist noch ein Problem. Right now, we're not going to talk about anything individual. As up to now, according to my logic, there's nothing individual going on. Nothing very special about you. There's something special in...
species of man.
Yeah, we're doing science here. Science only doesn't care about individuals. Science only cares about species.
In that case...
all sciences.
Science doesn't care about soul.
Exactly, not what you think soul is, but in this sense, yes.
No soul.
Yes, of course.
Oh.
The species of man has the capacity to think. That's what the soul of the man is.
And that is life.
Yeah, life for human life. You don't need it in the sense of?
Just call it life and call it a day.
Again, it's the same word. The difference is that again.
I don't need it as a mechanism. I don't need it at all.
That's what we're saying. Plants also have this neshama called life.
No, they don't need. There's nothing to need here. That's the point. Again, to answer the question. Again, the word is just a word that picks out what this word means according to this science or this philosophy. What it means is the capacity. Now I have to explain what this capacity is because it's actually made out of something. Like it's something. There's something to say about it. But it's the capacity that living humans have to think or to do human activities, whatever the human activities are. Saying, thinking, position, but whatever it is. That's all it is. You could take out the word soul. It's true.
But as an explanatory principle, it's not different than about plants as it is about animals, as it is about...
No, and it's not different about the forms of tables. But it's a specific kind.
People, right.
There's something more to be said about
because
people.
The subject matter is different, not because the principle of explanation is different.
Yes.
Right.
No, well, there's a difference. I can get the difference between dead things. The interesting difference here is the difference between dead things and living things. Now, I didn't say anything about people being different than animals today.
Right.
There's an explanation, and there's something to be said about this. But maybe what time is it? I don't even. But that's the interesting thing about what makes living. Why is this different from a dead thing? Being like this. But what did I say? We don't need separate souls, of course. And again, the answer to the question, where the soul goes, this soul goes when you die, is nowhere. There's no answer to that question. And the answer to the question, is there a body and a soul, or are these two things, and this is Aristotle's language, it's similar to, he literally gives the donut example. I mean, he gives the stamp and the wax example, you know? When you have a wax, then you put a stamp in it, and then you melt the wax, where did the stamp go? Is there a wax and a stamp, or is there a stamp and a wax? Well, there's the same thing, and you could look at it in two aspects, or in other words, the matter and the form, right? The wax is the matter, and the stamp is the form. Stamp, like in the old, and where does it go when you melt it? Same wherever, it doesn't go, right? That's very clearly what he thinks. He does have a way, again, like he does think there's a way to have an immortal soul, but that's his basic way is to have, and I'm going to say it, his basic way to have a part of a soul being immortal or not dying by having it, the way you would say it is something like having it made out of something that doesn't die. That's not precisely how you would think of it, but that's a simple way of saying it, right? Just like if I say, where do people soul go when they die? The same place where donut holes goes when you eat the donut, right? Okay, but that's a problem because donuts are made out of edible things, and then when you eat them, they can disappear. But the intellectual part of the human soul is made out of something indestructible. That would be the way for a soul to, or it's not instantiated, it's not part of something in matter. That's his way of saying it, not something that changes. So therefore, that's what we mean when we say that the intellect doesn't die. But that doesn't change the base, like you're saying, doesn't change the basic story that we have. It's still true that intellect with its matter, if it has a matter, are not two different things again.
Meaning it's only
There's no neshama and knower and known like the other. Right?
Meaning it's only the
It's
case
the same
because
thing.
the way we explain plants, if we explain the soul of thinking in that way, it would end up being immortal by a process of using this kind of explanation, right?
You could end up with something immortal only by having something
But I didn't
that's
move away
not
from my
an
plant theory,
aspect
right?
of a mortal thing. No, it didn't move away from the matter form theory. If you don't have something that's not matter, or that's at least not dying matter, then like in the same way that the heaven, according to him, is immortal, just because it lives forever, not because it's not made out of a matter and form, just because it's not matter of the kind of matter that destroys it, that destructs.
Right.
Just like whatever Elon Musk wants to live forever, but like it's basically, according to him, the only way to live forever is like Woody Allen said. He doesn't want to live forever in people's minds. He wants to live forever in his apartment. That's the basic mahalach. You have to live in something. You can't. There's no. That's the. That's not exactly the same, but it's then the same Nikida. There's living forever in many ways. I mean, you could, if people wouldn't die, wouldn't need this neshama. That's basically what. You understand what I'm saying? Anyways, that's enough for today. We're gonna get more confused if I say more things. So it's more than enough. Now you could ask all your kashas or more of them.
One key thing is that even a vegetable can't potentially become a human because it will die before that, and it's not a living vegetable. Life can never transfer because it's gonna always die first. That's
Why would vegetables become humans?
If you eat it.
Yeah, they become humans, not the living.
The matter, but not the vegetable.
Okay.
Meaning life, yeah, but two things.
Maybe there's a
that's the same thing
difference.
as saying one thing can't be two things.
But it can't even go there. It can't even do that step in between.
Saying is, but how's that different?
Okay, what's the problem with that? You need the life of the vegetable? I mean, it's true that humans mostly eat things that were once alive.
Yeah.
There must be something going on there.
Right.
Maybe because they have a certain kind of matter. Beside
They only eat things that were once alive.
salt.
Okay, so. Zero. No, but that's.
I mean, you could eat.
I just.
Yeah, water. You could eat minerals. You eat. You could
No,
eat.
not all salt is like it. Sure.
No salt is. She was living. Yeah, whatever. He has a theory of how food works also, and it's part of this whole theory because of this. Because eating is what is salt.
Is Aristotle bothered by salt?
By
Salt? That
what's the problem? No, I just said this. It's not a problem. You eat things that are edible.
Aristotle kind of question.
No, the Arizal has stories about this.
No, but drinking the matzah you do anyways, like Vasa.
Yeah, like you said. Water.
You're not using sugar because it comes from plants. Is that why? Why not? Sugar's not alive.
Yeah, it was a plant once at least.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but that's not. I don't think it's relevant.
When you eat a vegetable, it ceases to be because it turned into something else.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't become human.
The form of the vegetable stopped. The matter became human.
Still there.
The matter.
Even the matter is broken down.
Yeah, exactly. It's true.
Well, if Aristotle
But at least
matter,
there's levels of
the way
this.
it matters could
There's levels
change
of this.
entirely, right? The matter of the vegetable can entirely become a different matter.
According to him, that's his theory of food. All edible things, what it means for something to be edible means for it to be potentially human. The same thing.
Okay.
Or things that humans eat, whatever, and so on. Yeah. Because that's how he explains how eating was supposed to work.
Eat mud. What does he say? Just
Same thing.
The digestive system.
Oh, that's not actually edible, right? Because it doesn't make you grow. I mean, at least if it doesn't.
Doesn't incorporate
Yeah,
into
humans are
human.
potentially food. Yeah, that's a part of the fact. It's not a halacha. Man, halacha is different. Maybe you shouldn't do it, but that doesn't make it inedible.
Mud gives you fiber.
What?
No?
Wood?
Mud? I don't know. Maybe whatever it is. That's not a.
Shmuel, you try it. Can you let us know how it goes?
I will. Yeah. There was one time, whatever.
Is he really vomiting or is he not vomiting? What does it mean to vomit?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Is this every Wednesday night you have this?
Yeah.
8:30 p.m. Except
It's a shame.
usually.
8:30 exactly.
Yeah.
No, yeah. But what this also means, and this is what I said last week, and now maybe you'll see it clearer, because what this means is that if human life means to, it changes the understanding of activity. This is important, because we seem to not have this picture usually. Like for example, if to be human is to think, and the Rambam says this, but that means that when you're not thinking, you're not actively human, which means that you're only halfway, you're only potentially human. in that level. Or in the same way, if being a tzaddik, the Rambam says, like he says, literally says, this is the Rambam's answer for the problem of hashgacha. How could it be? He says, how could it be that tzaddikim sometimes have bad things happen to them? He says that happened to them when they were not tzaddikim. Well, they were potentially tzaddikim, but they were not actively being a tzaddik. Because actively being a tzaddik means thinking about God, and it's very hard to think about God 24 hours 7. So he has a good loophole. Whenever something happened bad, probably, and definitely when you're like in a ship that's sinking, it's hard to think about God in the same second. So that's why it sunk. That's where the Nefesh HaChaim got his idea of okay.
It's like Shlomo.
But nothing.
Yeah.
But meaning whatever the hashgacha is definitely.
But this is important because it shows you, and I think it's true. I think that being human is an activity. It's not a thing. We seem to have like this we seem to think that essentialism means that being human, like, or saying like being a yid or whatever, being something is something that being fully something is just something you are. They not do. It's the opposite. According to Aristotle, the only what living things are, is things that do. This is unlike the Buddhists. That's why I can make another thing against the Buddhists now, because they always think that being is different than doing. It's not. Being a human is an activity, and if you're just being human, then you're only potentially human. It's like being a lamb when you're not learning. It's very nice. It helps you. If you want, you could learn. But if you're not actually learning, then it's a shvet. Just like you're not actually tzaddiking, then you're not a tzaddik. That's why if you find that tzaddik in the bathroom or whatever, there's no use asking a brucha from him. Maybe because he has the potential, like Shiva Alich Menoch and
I'm saying it's right. So that's like Rambam really doesn't think that you can derive.
Why? If he's tzaddiking. Okay, you think that's when he's a tzaddik. Beside it, it's different shit. Different opinion of what a tzaddik is. Zalman Shechter says that he was once by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he said he wants Yichidus, and the Rebbe said, the one that you're looking for is not here today. What he's saying is that it's not a Rebbe, he has to be doing something. That day he was not feeling up to being a Rebbe. Ich kann dich reden mit dich, but ich kann nicht betor man, los nice, nicht betor Rebbe. I don't believe that the story happened, but it should have happened, you know?
I think the Rambam calls us like Yir Shamayim, maybe in one place at least. That all mitzvahs says for Yir Shamayim to think about Hashem basically.
Yeah, but to actively think.
Right, actively.
And the end of but he says he explicitly uses this language that he calls it koach karev, which is close potential. That was his translation for second potential, or whatever we call it here.
But koach karev doesn't get you anywhere.
Yeah, that's what koach. Now you understand what koach karev is.
Yeah, that's what that means. Okay, that's it.
What? It gets you very far because it makes you able now. If you learn, like the Rambam says in that in Perkan Aleph, now that you're a philosopher, now you can start becoming a mensch. Till now you weren't even able to, because if you wanted to think, you would start thinking like a chassid, and that's not even thinking. That's just saying Hashem, Hashem, Hashem. But that's not like you say. But now that you know what Hashem is, now you can start thinking about Him. But thinking is very different from knowing. That's the big thing. Thinking and knowing. What we usually call knowing is basically potentially knowing, because actively knowing is thinking about.
Don't you think in order to know?
Yeah, true. Like we said last week, there's 3 levels. First you think, and then you know, and then you think.
You know in order to.
But these are the 3 different meanings of the same thing, right? First we inquire.
Knowledge is limited because even now you know you have more.
Yeah, that's another baya, because humans never figure out the truth, so we're stuck. But it's still different. I actually think that inquiring is better than knowing, because at least you're being active, you're being alive. That's why asking questions is usually better than having answers. Not because it's better to not know than to know. That's dumb. But because you don't know, but because at least you're being actively exercising your faculty for knowing.
Even the Wikipedia also knows a lot.
Exactly, it's very different. That's why many people ask, like, I went to the Ram, that point is knowing, so Wikipedia should go to Hagan Eden. No, the point is not knowing, the point is thinking, and Wikipedia doesn't think. It can help people think, halavai, but doesn't think.
Inquire in order to think, in order to know.
Well, in order to know, and whatever, it depends on how you read these words, but yeah.
Go drink some schnapps now, and I think
there's over here. You can go. You have to think, and then you could know, and then you could think.
I think it's a
Sure, it's enough. What? Yeah, of course it is. It's not a derivative. It's this.
I'm saying they don't.
They don't know.